Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the lecture today. We are getting settled with the time change. So everyone's still waking up. Today we're gonna have our lecture done by our friend Tiago. It's gonna talk about the kingdom of heaven. But before, as always, we'll have our initial reading and prayer done by our friend Mari.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to read a message from Francisco Cândido Xavier, Enlightening Messages. Only Today by Manuel Monteiro. Throughout our whole life, you will never have another day like today. Remember this and attend to all good that you can do. Be useful by helping someone. Be heed to your duties. Happiness and peace, hope and care are what you wish to sow in your path. Joy and favor are gifts that you wish to offer. Relationships that you need to amend. Courtesy at home, the most simple and most demanding work. Review, readjust, corrections, forgiveness. Signs of care and esteem. Spiritual support during the work that you embrace and bless. Not one of those things should you delay or leave for later, because time will not return, and a day like today you only have once. So, with this message, let's close our eyes and let's have a deep breath. And let's be thankful for today. And let's remember these words and enjoy and bring the peace to other ones around us and even the ones that are far, but we know that need some peace, some hope, and some kindness. Let's thank our mentors for the opportunity of being here and help us to enlighten our friend Tiago during his lecture and help us to understand and put in practice his words. Thank you, and so be it. Thank you, Tiago.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Very good to see you all here. Good morning to everybody who is in the internet watching today or whenever you are going to watch this lecture. We're very happy that you are here. Today is International Women's Day, so let me just leave that message of gratitude, because being a woman in this world is not easy. So you have a very enlightening task. You have a lot of responsibilities, but also, the feminine spirit that brings so much for all of us. You are responsible in part for us to be here. So for that, we are going to be eternally grateful. And we hope that all women in the world that deserve to be safe, deserve to be respected, deserve to have their voices heard. We hope that this is going to happen. If not today, hopefully in the near future. And hopefully we all have a part in this to happen. So just leaving it all there. All right. Today, our lecture is about the kingdom of heaven. That very interesting place that has been talked about since the beginning of times. What is that place? Is that a place? How to get there? Is there other places that are not heaven? There are so many questions when I read about the kingdom of heaven. Probably there are many names depending the culture, depending where we were born. There will be different names for that. Probably there will be different things that we need to do to get there, depending where we are born in this world. The good thing is, through the lens of Spiritism, we are able to have an understanding of the concept of what is heaven, what is, this concept, how it applies to our lives. And independent of religion or faith, we can have a good understanding and really have a perspective of that idea of heaven in our lives. And if we talk about this with different people who have different ideas, it will be better for us to have an understanding as well. And obviously, ultimately, there will be a bit of a direction. This morning my son was looking around and he saw this big green sign with the letter P. He said, well, what is this? Well, it is the parking, right? And then why is there an arrow there? Well, it is the direction. So maybe we can have a little bit of direction after that, right? Let's see where the arrow is pointing us, right? After that. So, of course, that we're going to try to understand heaven from the basis, the foundation of that idea. Where do we read that? Where do we understand? Where is this coming from? And then we're going to be able to look through the eyes of Spiritism and try to make sense of it in a way that is much more tangible, that's more understandable for us. The central idea here is the kingdom of heaven, as much as it is talked about by organized faith in religion, it is not achieved through faith alone. Let's leave it like that. It is not achieved through faith alone. In the same way, there are many other concepts that we are learning, especially this year. There are so many foundations, on the idea of faith and the Spiritism brings to us. But it is important for us to understand that faith alone doesn't take us far, because faith is something that is like an engine that gives us the certainty that the path that we are taking is a good path, but we need to walk the path. It is also heaven, not a place that is given or a seat that is given to somebody based on favoritism. It is something that we need to work for it. So, there is a question that always comes to us when we think about heaven. Well, at least came to me. So then I'm sharing with you. And that question is, what happens after I die? I cannot talk about heaven or elsewhere, hell, for instance, if we don't think about how to get there. And to get there, we need to die, don't we? Let's see if that is the case or not. But let's start with that. Let's start with the premise that to get to that place, we need to die first. Every human culture, every era had that question. To live, to be born, to develop, to procreate, to age, and to die are universal truths to any organism that lives, right? But what about after? What happens with us after? That is a universal question. And that's why there are so many disciplines, studies, theories, religions that are going to talk about it. How to make the intangible tangible to us. So, how do we start that? And we start when, for us, I will bring Allan Kardec. And throughout this lecture, you will see that the foundation is the works of Allan Kardec. And why not the Gospel of Jesus? Because Allan Kardec will rely a lot on the Gospel of Jesus also to have that understanding. And the first point that we need to make is, what do we understand about life to understand about death? For instance, do you think that after that there is nothing? If we think that nothing exists, we go to a certain direction. If we think that we're going to go back to a certain hole, to a certain place where everything becomes one, we have another direction. Then if we think that something happens, that is an existence that persists after death, we go to another direction. What Allan Kardec would say in the book Heaven and Hell is, first of all, for us to make sense of that idea of a heaven or a positive, happy place after death, we need, first of all, to challenge that idea of nothingness. And the philosophy that talks about that nothingness or the meaninglessness of everything is called, it's called nihilism. It is a philosophical, body that talks about the meaninglessness of life, the meaninglessness of existence in a way. Therefore, what we will see at the end, it is meaningless also. It is the nothing. And Allan Kardec would say, if we live with that idea that there is nothing after, why would we do anything better necessarily? Why would we refrain from living the best life that we can live? Why do we need to care? It is a careless life. So he would say, we need to look at this and prevent that we are going to live a meaningless life, because he will then show, and the entire Spiritism will show us, what happens after death depends a lot on the life that we live here. We need to restore the meaning of living, to restore then the meaning of the afterlife. Afterlife as a consequence of the life that we live on this earth. He would say, right? We live, we think, we act. This is certain, he would say. And we die. That is no less certain. And then he will continue, right? But where do we go when we leave this earth behind? Being or not being, forever and evermore, all or nothing. We live that. And for us to be able to have peace and find a place between the all or the nothing, we need to understand that there must be something to give meaning to the existences that we live. There must be something that we can harvest the seeds that we plant today. If we are not being able to harvest that seed as a fruit still when we are here, a lot of the seeds that we plant today, we're not going to harvest. We're going to leave it behind, are we? So, nihilism potentially will lead to selfishness, to the meaninglessness of life. I only think about today. But believing that there is something after death, that there is a future life, has the potential to lead us to look at our conduct, to evaluate our actions and our conduct. And here I will be very deliberate when we talk about things like morals. Very common in Spiritism that we talk about, right? We need to be moral people. What does that mean? It is very easy for us to take that. But what does that really mean? It means that the moral represent our individual conduct, the actions that we consider positive or negative. We need to look at our conduct to understand that what happens after life will help us to evaluate and to redirect the course of our lives and our conduct. in order to pursue something positive, even after life, let alone today as well. The Spiritism, then, according to Allan Kardec, will elevate that belief and demonstrates with certain level of certainty, with experiment and with the science that he had back then, that actually is being proven today by modern ways of science, that there is an existence beyond physical death, that there is a consciousness that survives after. And through the experiments that he did, through the communications that he received, through the evocations that he made, he was able to collect a very strong body of understanding and information showing that there is an impact on the afterlife based on the lives that we live here and now. So then, of course, that it begs another question, right? So you're talking about, afterlife. So then we're talking about there is another life. If there is another life, the question is, what is that? What is that? What is the presence? What is the quality? Which directions do we take? Is there good places? Is there bad places? Reminds me of a TV show. I don't know if you're there. It's called A Good Place. And it was very interesting that they were fooled that they were going to the good place, but they are going to the bad place. So let's try to understand how we continue being in the good place, right? Who can help us with that? What happens there? Which direction we go? What is this about? Who can help us? I usually like the parables that Jesus taught us. I usually go back to Jesus. And there is a reason for that, because Jesus was able to plant those seeds of understanding for us, and he gave us so many lessons through his parables, that those parables, when understood today, when put in context, are relevant more than ever. It is understood. Jesus, he never defined the kingdom of heaven as a literal place, as a geographical place. There was no map. Oh, there. Heaven is right here. No. He always spoke in parables or in metaphors. The kingdom of heaven is like, all the time. It is like. Why would he do that, right? Okay, there are two reasons, mainly. The first one is, imagine if we were living 2,000 and odd years ago. We were probably people who worked in the fields. Education was not very easy back in the time. They only had the elements of the nature to understand the meaning of things. They always used references based on the simple lives that they lived. So then Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, will then use those elements to create stories, so then people would be able to understand. Plus, Jesus knew that today we will have something like interpretation of the language, context, the importance of understanding the idioms, right? We will be able to look at history and extract the essence of his teachings, because today we are ready to take that. So he describes a reality of that kingdom that will transcend space and time, and will give us a very interesting mental picture. So let's think about that. When he thinks about the mustard seed, it begins with something very small, almost significant. He looks at the mustard seed that turns into a huge plant, a huge tree. So he says the kingdom of heaven is like that. It is like something very small that you plant and then you need to let it grow. Does that have anything to do with a place? Or it may have to do with something that we cultivate. More something within us that starts like a seed. Some attitude, some thoughts, some belief, some consideration about life, some understanding about the meaning of things that starts very small and then starts growing in us. Also actions, right? Conducts. I start doing something positive, something good as a seed. It's very small, it's very difficult, very awkward, until it becomes very natural. We start doing good for the sake of doing good. If we think about, the idea of gradual spiritual evolution through the practice and perfecting our moral attitudes, our virtues, it's very aligned with what Spiritism tells us today. If we think about the parable of the leaven or the yeast, to be very honest, I was reading it and I got a translation of the Bible. So, what is leaven? I didn't understand, so then I needed to go to the dictionary. There it is. The parable of the yeast, right? The yeast is something that you put in the flour and the dough, and what happens? Slowly makes it all right. The kingdom of heaven is like the woman that was, kneading the dough, and then she put the yeast and let it grow and let it happen, and then suddenly, whoop, it grew. Again, not a geographical place, but what? An internal disposition, something that grows from within, something that you put there and is contagious to everything around. Again, very consistent, right? It starts from within and it grows. The hidden treasure, the parable, by the way, if you want to know more about the kingdom of heaven from Jesus, Matthew 13. I was actually surprised and I forgot that. The list is all there. Matthew 13. You start and you don't stop. At the end, you have the kingdom of heaven in your hand. It's very, very beautiful because Jesus dedicated a specific time, where he dedicated himself fully to explain that. And he went over and over and over. By the way, in this parable, in this passage, Jesus also looks at the disciples and said, I say this in parables because you will understand what I'm saying, because I'm going to explain, but the majority of you will not. So he knew that many of us will not understand. Just a little side note. Hidden treasures, right? The hidden treasures are found, brings joy when we find a hidden treasure, something that was hidden for a long time, and there we find. However, it demands a lot of work. To find the hidden treasure, we need to make the unknown known. We need to make what is hidden be visible. We need to dig. We need to unveil. We need to unearth. And then we find it. And usually what do? We put away what is not necessary. That parable is interesting because it talks about in the middle of so many things that blur our view, in the middle of things that really dampen and hide our real treasures, we need to sift to find what is really precious. We need to look within, understand what is good, what is not within. What are the attitudes that lead us to a better place? What are the attitudes that don't? And finally, the parable of the net. The kingdom then involves a certain sort of reckoning, right? A sifting. And here is very interesting because the idea that the souls were sorted according to their, virtues. What they made of them is like the fish, the ones that were useful, the ones that were not. The ones that were taken to be used, the ones that were not. It is not that we're going to be, in this huge mega sift that God is, no, that's not what it is. But it means that not everybody will achieve that state of being in the same time as others. We are all in different places, and we depend to each one of us to finally achieve by advancing, right? It is not the idea of something that is uniformly, granted to everybody. God gives us the canvas, and we are the ones painting our lives. And then we will be able to enjoy, the happiness that comes with us making life a happy thing. Again, not a physical place. It is dynamic, it is organic, it is interior, it is moral, depends solely on our conduct. And when I say the conduct, it's not only individual, right? It is also collective conduct. If we think about families that are together, that grow together, that mend their relationships, that improve their relationship, here we are evolving morally together, advancing, improving our ways to relate with each other, nations, communities. It is not only individual, but also collective. Collective. We were talking about Portuguese and English before the lecture. Oh my gosh. Here is the example. So it's not a fixed place granted by divine fortunes. There is no lottery for that. We take that imagery, and Spiritism brings us to a form, to something that is really tangible. And not only that, brings the kingdom within. Helps us to understand what Jesus was talking about. Okay. So, it is important also to understand that Jesus not only brought to us some parables, but in very crucial times in his existence, he also spoke about it. And it is important also to think that a lot of the lessons that he gave about that kingdom of heaven were given in very important times when he was close to his own death. In Spiritism, we talk about discarnation, right? But to discarnate, right, there is also a death. He was close to dying. Right? So the words that he gives to Pontius Pilate when he is being judged, when he's being condemned, when he's learning his human fate, not faith again, sorry. It refers to that idea of a future life, the true destination. There is also the idea of a progression, continuity. Again, not as a geographical place, but as a state of being beyond the material life. A place where we are able to look back and understand the purpose of our existences. My kingdom is not of this world. And we can extract so many layers of understanding from that. We can think about the kingdom is not of this world means if we only live with the perspective that the life is material, that would be then the kingdom of earth. We need to find the best that we can here and now. The most important thing is to achieve what we need to achieve right here. Kingdom. The world back then, unfortunately today as well, it is the achievement of that kingdom. A kingdom is the place higher than any other place, the seat higher than any other seat, the position higher than any other position. And there is a shock right there. The earthly kingdom and the divine kingdom. What is that idea of that kingdom? They didn't understand him. He challenged that very place that many aspire to be the king of this earth. But he showed us in a crucial time That's not it. That is not it. And then Allan Kardec will continue helping us to say, Spiritism has come then to complete the teachings of Christ. Now that humans have matured enough, now that we are ready to fully understand the essence of Jesus' message. The future is no longer a simple article of faith. It's beautiful the way that he says that. It is a material reality demonstrated by facts. Well, which facts, Tiago? Well, thank you for asking. Allan Kardec was a very astute man. He was a very intelligent man, a very dedicated, methodological. He was serious, and he treated this with seriousness. He didn't take things simply as they were, but he made sure that he understood that some things had a very powerful meaning. There. Allan Kardec, among other ways, he was able, through the Spiritist society in Paris that he helped to create, to put in practice many of the teachings of the spirits, especially the ones related with the relationship between the spiritual and the material world. Are those worlds communicable, relatable? And he was able to experiment that. One of the ways that he did that, it was through evocation. So he evoked spirits that had departed from this world, some of them whom he knew, who also were there, worked together with the group of scholars and professionals and researchers, if we can say, to try to really extract, from those communications, principles that we could then take advantage of. And testimonies. Because who better than those who already went through that to come back to us and say, hey, you know what? That's what I've done. And that are the consequences. Those are the impacts. So then I will tell you what's happening with me based on the life that I've lived. And that's exactly what happened. Right? He gives first-hand testimonies of unhappy, hardened, hesitant, indifferent, and happy spirits. Those are not necessarily even philosophical arguments. Those are first-hand accounts. I will just describe to you and read, if you allow me, some of the testimonies that were given. The first one by Mr. Sansom, that died in 1862, and he was a member of the Paris Spiritist Society. When he was asked about his immediate state after that, he says, my situation is quite happy. And then I became interested right away. How? What did you do? What did you do? I feel none of my former pain. Apparently, he went through a very serious illness before he discarnated. I have recovered. I am renewed. An ineffable happiness surrounded me. Not longer felt the grip of pain. So, first of all, it is interesting that this testimony shows that there is a state of being beyond the material senses. Just from there, we can extract that. So afterlife is beyond that material life that we're living today. I saw that I was surrounded by many faithful friends. All the protector spirits were smiling around me, and an equal happiness animated them. There are no words in the human language that can express what I saw next. And then he gives Allan Kardec and his partners a kind of an advice, a kind of a word of hope as well. May you no longer fear death. It is only another step for you if you have known how to live well. This is first-hand testimony. Courage and goodwill do not assign more than a mediocre value to earthly possessions, and you will be rewarded. And here, this is very coherent to what Spiritism helps us to understand. To live in this world is very important. It is not about neglect, but it is about putting in perspective and giving the importance that it has. Our bodies, our possessions, they are useful for us as long as we make a good use of them. Because we will need to say goodbye to most of what we have, if not everything, if we only consider that we have material life. But what we take is the lessons that we took from using the resources that we have on this earth. It is not about what we have, but about what we do with what we have. Right? Then we have Mr. Jobard, who died in 1861. And he was simply saying, "Oh, my friends, how joyful it is to be free from the weight of the body. What ecstasy there is in embracing space." Again, interesting. Space. The universe. Everything. Everywhere. We are in space. But be in a happy state of being for being in space. That is very powerful. More and more we are turned within. Our state of being dictates if we are really in that kingdom of heaven. That's what he's saying. I'm now a little concerned with pure intellectual questions, he says. How could I be when I am in awe, enraptured by the marvelous spectacle surrounding me? And apparently Mr. Jobard was a genius. And even being a genius, he then describes, it is not what I have known. It is what I am feeling right now. It is not about the intellect necessarily. What do I do with my intelligence? And finally, Mr. Samuel Philippe. Right? My death was like sleep without struggle, shock, since I had no fear about my future. That is the only point. I had no fear about my future. Right? From the very beginning, he was beyond that idea of nothingness. He had that certainty that life would continue. The separation occurred without effort, without pain, without me realizing it. The passage to the next step of our existences, more we put in perspective how important it is in relation to the spiritual world, will lead us in a very positive way to the continuation of our existences. I not only forgive you, he says to his persecutors. He had persecutors. Persecutors. He had enemies. I not only forgive you, but I thank you. Here we go back to the idea of the attitude, the moral attitude. What do I do in relation to everybody, including those who don't like me and who do everything to see my demise? God put you in my way to test my patience and enable me to practice the most difficult kind of charity, loving one's enemy. We're going to get to charity in a second. But it is interesting. The operationalization of what Jesus has said already 2,000 years back. Love your enemy. If you only love those who love you, what merit does it have? Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And you will reach the kingdom of heaven. Here is the operationalization of that principle that Jesus already gave to us. So we see that those testimonies are very powerful. They show us that the moral quality, of a person's life directly shapes their way that they're going to understand and direct themselves to that future life. When we talk about charity, when we talk about faith, when we talk about the certainty of a future life, it will lead us to a more peaceful existence and a more positive outlook of the future. The opposite is also true, right? Clinging to materialism will probably lead us to suffering. The happiness of the spirit world is vivid, is luminous, like in awe. It is difficult even to describe. It takes us. The bonds of love, they will also intensify. If we don't believe that there is anything after, we are fated to lose forever even relationships. If we understand that the future life is going to hold us a better situation, it means that not only us, but also those who we have loved or departed before us may be waiting for us. And that is also something that brings us hope. And that glimpse of a happiness ahead of us that allow us to move through this life with a little bit less burden when we face that experience. And earthly trials, right? Lived with perseverance, with the meaning that there is something beyond that, will also lead us to learn many good things about ourselves, our capabilities. We start even thanking the obstacles, because actually they are the ones that help us to overcome. Every time that we have a problem and we solve a problem, what happens? We have two problems. And then exponentially we have more. Why? Because we become good at it. You want to solve a problem, become good at it, just to sit and retire. That's not how life is, right? More solving problems means that we are better at something. And life will give us more, because that is the way. That's what is being shown to us. So these testimonies will then bring us to the central, let's call it insight, right? The kingdom is not a place, a condition of the soul, right? And what will the soul become? So one of the Spiritism's most profound contributions is that the kingdom of heaven is a state of the spirit. So let's look at that idea of the state of the spirit. Right? For those who through their thought place themselves in the spiritual life, right? Corporeal life is no more than a passage. We start doing things, we start living our lives not about what we can take from this life, but what can we take forever. What can we take? How can we grow in qualities that don't die with my body? What can I do to continue progressing in a way that is never going to stop? What are the things that I can do then today? What's that idea of my state of spirit? How can I improve my state of spirit? The Spirit's book will also say, right? Passions. Passions. Remember, passion equals pain. The definition of passion is actually pain and suffering. Passions are like envy, jealousy, right? And according to the Spirit's book, they make a true hell of our lives. One example, if we retain lots of possessions and for some reason we lose it, those who have perspective of the future life will understand that this being taken away is not just a condition of life, and we are able to make it grow again. We are able to restore what is essential for us. For those who cling to earthly possessions, when they lose everything. They lose themselves. They lose the meaning of the existence because they lose what is here that they are clinging to it. When they see somebody that have more than them, either they hate, they wish the others wouldn't have, some will do everything to take their place, or if those who don't believe in themselves will try to bring others down. So at least they are both in the same lower level. Now, the idea of a kingdom of heaven as something future, let's think about it. The kingdom of heaven is actually existing. The pursuit and the construction, the edifying of that kingdom, if it is a state of the soul, is already in motion within each one of us. So when we talk about kingdom of heaven, if we go through the beginning to the end even of the gospel, in the beginning, we hear things like, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is near. But here we are given another perspective. The kingdom of heaven, if it is within me, is already alive. It is already alive. Which means heaven or hell is already a potential within us. In fact, so many days we wake up like in heaven. Sometimes we wake up like in hell. Sometimes our bosses make hell of our lives if we let them. Sometimes we thank for the challenges and we go to heaven when we go home. We feel it. It is tangible. Affects our minds, affects our emotions, affects our bodies. The stress that we go through, the misery that we cultivate makes us sick. The positive disposition, the positive outlook in life even lead us to treat physical illnesses as some things that are there to allow us to learn something from it. And we don't lose the hope or the perseverance, and we find meaning, and we find ways to overcome, or we find ways to understand that maybe those are the ways that are leading us closer to that kingdom of heaven. Each one of us is the architect, let's say, of our own future. Unlike some doctrines of another stance that give us that kingdom for grace alone or for faith alone, an empty faith that cannot be achieved by pure adoration, by pure contemplation, but real, concrete acts in our lives. Allan Kardec would say most times people are the artisans of their own unhappiness. If they would practice the law of God, they would separate them from many of, or spare them from many of their misfortunes. And it is not possible to think about that without thinking about the idea of reincarnation as well. You know, are we living this life and that is the end? Spiritism tells us the justice of this process of enlightenment and evolution and growth and spiritualization and achieving that heavenly state of being is a work of the centuries, is a work of the millennia, it is a work of the endless time, an endless work. There is no end for us learning. There is no end for us growing. There is no end for us to pursuing and making that seed of heaven grow within us. The evolution of spirits is progressive, never regressive. They raise themselves gradually through the hierarchy and don't descend from the level that they have achieved. We continue progressing step by step. In the Spiritism, we have that level, of there is a classification of spirits. But at the end of the day, what does that mean? That means that we have a destination, and the destination is achieved by our own efforts. Well, God will give us every tool that we need in this existence for us to achieve that kingdom of heaven. God will give every resource at our disposal to make our lives better, more meaningful, happier, to achieve the aspect of the kingdom of heaven that we can find in this existence. But then, He will leave us free to pursue for ourselves. So, first of all, the kingdom of heaven is achieved by our own effort. Therefore, we have the free will. We are free to make the decisions. And we are going to feel the impact of those decisions. And the impact of those decisions that we feel is going to help us to change the course of our actions. The justice of reincarnation helps us to understand that achieving the kingdom of heaven doesn't need to be something that we need to fully or finally achieve in that existence. We are going to be able to pursue what we can pursue. If still we suffer, if we still there is a way ahead of us, let's continue, because life doesn't end here. It means that we need to have that, the happiness already to understand that if we have a life of more challenges than others, it means that we are on our own path to achieve that happiness that maybe we aspire to have, seeing even others having that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't work to compare yourself. Compare yourself with who you were yesterday. That is going to help us always to take a better path, to find that heaven within us, the happier place, to understand that the only ones that we need to combat is ourselves. And the progress is never lost. And again, the spirits, the Spiritism talk about the virtues. The virtues are all those qualities, all those qualities. Briefly, before we end them, let's talk about those qualities a little bit. It is important that we have something very concrete ahead of us. You know, one of the most important principles that can be extracted in Spiritism: without charity, there is no salvation. We know as well that salvation is actually the idea of we save ourselves from our inferior, negative, primitive, materialistic, nihilistic tendencies. That is the salvation. Saving ourselves from the extreme connection of materialistic life that all of us, in some level, still have. We are a work in progress. And how do we do that? Through that very word that is said over and over and over, that is called charity. But we will go back to the very definition that was given to us by the spirits. When Allan Kardec very wisely asks, what is the meaning of charity as given by Jesus himself? What is this? He was very astute. Because we hear about charity, charity, charity all the time. And many of us would not even question that. But he was the first one. Let's talk about that. And the spirits were very clear. Benevolence towards everyone. Indulgence towards the imperfections of others. Indulgence in the sense of, considering, right? Overlooking sometimes. Not judging, not pointing. Let them be. They are imperfect. Let them be. They are imperfect, like me. And forgiveness of the offenses. When charity also has a material perspective on that, this is a consequence. This is important, a very important consequence, because we can operationalize the benevolence, we can operationalize the indulgence, we can operationalize the forgiveness by respecting, by understanding, by putting things in context, by not taking offenses personally. People who are hurt are going to hurt. People who are imperfect are going to do imperfect things. And when we understand that benevolence means looking for the well-being of everybody. So I respect, so I'm patient, so I take time to listen, so I can give whatever I have. And I can also help to provide for those who have less. This is all charity. In the same way that heaven is an internal place, charity is an internal disposition, first and foremost. It is an internal disposition. Charity, according to Jesus, will embrace all relations to everybody, with myself and with others. And when we say forgiveness of the offenses, is also forgiving ourselves. Please don't forget that. Loving one's enemy. The charity is given without ostentation. Remember, it's better to have less virtue with more humility than having more virtue but less humility or humbleness. To do this for the sake of doing, not to do this for others to see. At the end of the day, it is summed by what Jesus said. Love one another like I have loved you. Not only love one another and love God. At the end of his life, sitting down with his disciples, then he says, love one another just like I have loved you. Because he is the model of love. There is absolutely no question. He did it, all of that. He gave us all of that out of love. So he was already in heaven. When he came here, when he suffered during his death, he was already in heaven. After all, the kingdom of heaven is within us, as is stated very well in the book of Luke. Future life is certain. Jesus spoke in many different ways about that kingdom. Heaven is a disposition of the Spirit. It is earned, not granted, without merit. Charity, in the way that we just understood, is the gateway. And remember, the kingdom is within us. Therefore, heaven is within us. Heaven is possible every single day. So we began asking, what happens after death? And the Spiritism will answer, right? But not in a fantastic way. Help us to understand that this is actually a moral challenge, a challenge of our conducts, right? What happens after death will depend above all on what we do in life. This kingdom of heaven is not waiting for us at the end of some road. It is already, let's call, the road that we take. And every act of charity, every gesture, every action of forgiveness, sacrifice, benevolence, are then the building blocks of that kingdom that is already within us, that we need to continue doing over and over every single day. Because that is then the formula for us to finally achieve the happiness that we all, after all, aspire for. Thank you very much. All right, let me get my tea. Is there questions? From the internet, from the...
Just have a comment here, but it was right in the beginning, and I'm not sure you know who's putting the comment. It says, if we are rockets blasting off with our birth and flying through our life, what's the payload? It's just
There is some very interesting depth on it when we are fighting for our lives. Every one of us will have probably a different perspective of what is to fight for my life. Right? And I think each one of us will know what it is. We don't need, again, to compare. Fighting for my life may be with a physical illness, may be with relationships that are, make me unhappy, and maybe financial difficulties today. But to each one of us according to our deeds, as said before. If we understand life as more than what life is today, if we understand that we are spirits in evolution, we understand that we are paving the road for ourselves to walk. Therefore, some difficulties can only be understood in that context. That's what I can say about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chi. Thank you, everyone who joined us online. We're going to get ready for our passes. Hope to see you guys